This video is brought to you by MoviePalette.com and enter ROOM15 for 15% off of your palette. Hey horror fans, welcome back to 1237, back with another review as I continue my run through of films based on real life serial killers. And this is another film that I don't own. It's one I was kind of planning on picking up. The director had me kind of weary on whether I should pick it up or not. But it was one I was thinking about, and like my last review of Ed Gein Butcher Plainfield, I found it for free on YouTube. I actually found a whole playlist of full serial killer movies. However, I don't think the person that made the playlist really knows the difference between a film based on a real life serial killer, a movie inspired by a real life serial killer, and just a movie where the main character happens to be a serial killer. Because I think there's hundreds of movies and clips on there. A few of them are true crime, real life serial killer movies. Some are like Chainsaw Massacre 2, which is inspired by Ed Gein. Then there's just movies where, the main character happens to be a serial killer. And like Wolf Creek is not based on Ivan Milat. It's inspired by him. There's a big difference between based on and inspired by. But this is another one that I found for free on YouTube, and now this finally will be the last Bundy film or Bundy related film that I'll be reviewing. Because the subject matter of this film is pretty much the same thing as another Bundy film that I've already reviewed, where it's just a specific event or thing that happened during the life of Bundy and another serial killer. But the director is Andrew Jones, and I'll talk about why I was weary about this film. But I don't even know when this came out. I think it was 2018, 2019, and it's Bundy and the Green River Killer. Which, yes, it's pretty much the story of how he contacted Robert Keppel, FBI agent, FBI profiler, so he could give his insight and expertise on how to catch the Green River Killer. That happened in 1984. The Green River case, pretty much, it started in 82. The task force disbanded in 89, but Gary Ridgway was not caught until 2001. So Bundy, he did a few interviews where he gave his insight, but then that led into Keppel interviewing him about his own cases, his own confessions. Very similar to another film, 2004, The Riverman, which aired in 2004. This is a much better film. It's a TV movie. It's shot better. It's acted better. It's more faithful to what really happened. I highly recommend this one. Of course, I don't even know if this got the credit for based on the book by Robert Keppel, but that one did. The book is called The Riverman, How Ted Bundy and I Caught the Green River Killer. I'm just seeing if... No, it didn't even get like a based on credit. No, he didn't. But it tells pretty much the same story as this. How there's a killer in the Green River area of Washington. Detective David Reichert and FBI agent Robert Keppel. They team up. Bundy reaches out to give his insight. They go to interview him. He says a couple things, and then Keppel starts to interview him more about his cases. Reichert goes back to Washington to help solve the case. Things go quiet after the 80s, and then in 2001, DNA comes out and shows Ridgway as the killer, which he was picked up in 81 or 82 on prostitution charges. He became a suspect in 83. He took a polygraph and passed in 84. It doesn't really shed light on how the community, well, not this film, but this one shows more about the community backlash, about how inept they think they are at solving the case. This film, not so much. But the reason why I was weary about this film is because the writer-director Andrew Jones. Now, I don't know if he's as bad as, say, Will Barrett, but Andrew Jones is known for films like the Robert Killer Doll movies, Poltergeist Activity, Halloween Jack, Amityville Asylum, just really ultra low budget, just straight to crap movies. But he has done some that are built around some kind of true story, such as, there was a Manson Family Massacre, Jonestown Haunting. He did do A Killer Next Door, which I have reviewed about John List. Which, the John List one, the stuff surrounding him is kind of true. But he really inflated the whole thing with the neighbor seeing his story on America's Most Wanted and then calling the cops. He pretty much made a Disturbia type movie built around that. So I wasn't sure how inflated or fictional this was going to be. Now, Will Barrett will just take a true crime story and make a horror subgenre film based around it. Like, the reason why the last Bundy film there is, American Boogeyman, why I'm not reviewing that, is because pretty much the only thing that's true in that film is the Chi Omega murders. Which even then, I think it just shows him going in a sorority house. And so it's a completely fictional film. I thought this was going to kind of be that way. But I have to say, it did have some truth to it. It does, a lot of the dialogue given from the Bundy character is verbatim to a lot of the confession tapes and interviews that he had done. It does get some stuff right. It kind of truncates a lot of it. Like, everything dealing with the beginning of the task force, Ridgway being picked up, questioned, given a polygraph, talking to Bundy, all happening pretty much in 82. It truncates all those things that happened over a number of years in the 80s into 82. And it jumps from 82 to 89 to 2001. So, it's not that the film was terrible. It's just I've seen it done better, way better in this film, that I kind of just thought, what's the point? Other than the fact that, okay, it's an interesting story where you have the most notorious serial killer sort of giving insight on this would-be or becoming another notorious serial killer. And yes, this was what inspired the whole Clarice Hannibal interrogations or conversations in Silence of the Lambs. Some people will say Red Dragon, but Red Dragon came out before the Green River murders. So I'm sure Andrew Jones's other films are worse, but this was better than I expected. But that's not saying much. It's still not a very good film. The casting, I'll get to that. But you have Mark Homer as Detective David Richards, which of course is David Reichert. You have Philip Roy as Bob Keller, Bob Keppel, which IMDb says that all the names of everyone, including the victims, have been changed except for Ted Bundy and Gary Ridgway, except for Bob Keller. It says Bob Keller is a real person who wrote the book that this is based on. No, Bob Keller is still a fictional name because the book was written by Bob Keppel. However, there is another one. This movie opens up with, I guess, to show us who Ted Bundy is. It opens up with the Chi Omega murders. And after we see him bludgeon the two girls that he killed in the sorority house, and the one girl comes home, which instead of him running past her and leaving like he did in real life, he like covers her mouth, shushes her, and then leaves. But she calls out two names to her friends that live there, Lisa and Margaret. Only says first names, but those are the real names. Lisa Levy and Margaret Bowman. Those are the two girls that were killed in the Chi Omega house. It doesn't mention the two that survived the attack. It just shows the two that were killed. Nor does it mention the woman 8 blocks away that he also attacked. But so there are two real names, even if they are first names. Lisa and Margaret. But other than that, we have Richard Mark as Ted Bundy and Jared Nelson as Gary Ridgway. Those are really our main players. One thing is, I think it was the exteriors were shot somewhere in America, but the interiors were shot in South Wales. The accents of many of the actors come through quite a bit. So it's kind of distracting when it's supposed to take place in Washington and you have these European accents coming through. Through dialogue, some of the timeline is thrown off, which I'll get to. But the acting, it's I wouldn't say it's horrible. There's not like horrible acting, but it's not very good. Mark Homer as Richards, he's very forgettable. The guy playing Keller or Keppel, he does fine. I mean, nothing really super memorable, but he did fine. Now, Richard Mark is Ted Bundy. He doesn't really look like Bundy, except for, okay, some things he does with his eyes or his eyebrows. He doesn't, his voice doesn't sound like Bundy, but you can tell he watched interviews and he's kind of doing an impression because his speech patterns and the way he talks is very similar, even though his voice doesn't sound like him. And a lot of his mannerisms, like the way he'll kind of like dip his head or look up through his eyebrows, things he does with his eyes and his eyebrows is similar. And the way his hair is, he does look, if I had to pick any of them, it would have been his August 79 mugshot from Florida, which is the photo that you see. That's the one that it reminded me of the most. So he kind of looks like that. Now, when he's doing straight dialogue, like when he's doing verbatim lines from a confession tape or a Green River tape or an interview, you can definitely tell he's trying to do an impression of that because the speech pattern does sound like Bundy, the way he's kind of like, the way he kind of like looks up and does things with his hands. You can definitely tell that. But original lines, that's when the bad acting comes through. Because when he's doing the Bundy stuff, it comes across fine. But then there's lines like, well then why are you here, Bob? Like, I don't think he knows how to take that Bundy personality to original lines. But when he's doing the verbatim stuff, he's fine. Now, Jared Nelson as Ridgway, he's doing this very dry, deep voice, almost robotic performance that is nothing like Ridgway. In fact, the way he looks and the way he talks, he's more like Ed Kemper. He reminded me of Kemper a lot more. Just his speech pattern, the way he says things, the way it's like this slow, drawn out, deep voice, kind of more like Kemper. The glasses and the comb over was more like the way he walks was more like Kemper. there really wasn't anything Ridgway about him. Now, I did read that some of his lines were improvised, but then I read during his confession it was taken directly from some of the confession tapes. I must have missed some of it, but yeah, I there's really not a lot with him anyway, but yeah, he definitely reminded me more about Ed Kemper. And the film itself, I mean, it looks like a low budget film. It looks like ultra low budget. Really, there's not a whole lot of production value behind it. I mean, the scenes with Bundy in the Florida State Prison, as you saw in that picture, it has this weird lighting, like this weird orange lighting. It doesn't feel like a prison at all. It I was gonna say it feels like a movie set, but yeah, it just doesn't feel natural. Uh, yeah, just not much to say about the production value. Um, the only book I have on anything Green River, I do need to get the Riverman book, which is written by Keppel and forwarded by Ann Rule, which Ann Rule wrote Green River Running Red. This is the only book I have on Green River. But Ridgway has always been, and I know people might not like this term, I don't know what else to say. He's been one of my favorites. He's been one, like, I would put him in a top 10 that I find most fascinating, favorite ones to read about, watch documentaries about. I mean, how the guy was able to kill confirmed 49 women and dump them all pretty much in the same area and still not get caught for almost 20 years. I mean, a span of 19 years between his first victim and when he finally got caught. Even though he stopped killing, they think as late as 98, but different sources will say different things. Some will say they ended around 85, 86, or 89, but still, how he was able to get away with it. And yeah, a lot of it was because he passed a polygraph, was because DNA was not that sophisticated, but it's always been a very fascinating story. Which is why I think this film handles it a lot better. Uh, there are a number of other Green River films. There's, I think it's called The Capture of the Green River Killer, which was a TV movie. There's one that just says Green River Killer movie. That's like 2.5 hours. I'll have to look into that. There's another one called Green River that's just about a woman looking for her sister that disappeared. I don't know how informative that is. Then there's the Uwe Lamel film, which is shit. It's probably the best one of his killer films, but it's still a crap film. So this movie, again, just not that good of acting. Uh, the best acting would be Philip Roy as Keller, but when the guy playing Bundy is doing the Bundy stuff, he's good. But when he's doing his own lines, that's when you can tell he's not very good. So it opens up January 15th, 1978, which was the night of Chi Omega. True date. It shows him. Flirting with the girls at the bar, following them home. Now I don't remember if he actually talked to them at the bar, but I do know he followed them. Shows him getting the block of wood from outside, going upstairs, and it just shows him bludgeoning the two girls. Now, the two that were killed were in side-by-side beds in the same room. One of them was sexually assaulted and bitten terribly. But it just shows him clubbing the two of them. Doesn't show him bludgeoning the two that survived. And then the friend that he ran past that came home, he like covers her mouth and shushes her. But she calls out the two names, Margaret and Lisa. So then we go to Green River, Washington, 82, first year of the killing spree. We're introduced to Detective David Richards, based on Reichert. FBI agent Bob Keller, obviously based on Bob Keppel. Uh, Keppel sort of gives his background because they first meet. He says, back in '74, we had 2 girls go missing on the same day in Lake Sammamish. True, that was July 14th of '74. Talks about how, it came true that it was this guy Bundy, who of course you all know now. But, I helped catch him because he was all these other states. So he mentions Lake Sammamish because every Bundy movie has to mention Lake Sammamish. We see Ridgway pick up a prostitute with his son Benjamin in his truck. Now this is true. His son's name was Matthew, not Benjamin. But yeah, there was at least one occasion where he had to pick up a prostitute with him in his truck or car, and he would take the prostitute down to the river, do his thing, come back. And he would also stop off, leave his son in the car, go down, tend to the dead bodies, and then leave. But other times, he even mentions to the prostitute, like, this is my son Benjamin, remember I showed you his picture? He would drive around with a picture of his son in his visor or in his truck, or if he took them home, he would show them his son's room. That way they knew he had a son and they would think he was less threatening. So it throws that aspect in there. I missed it in the film, so I don't know if Bundy reached out to Keppel or if Keppel decided to talk to Bundy. But in real life, it was, I think, October of '84. It was '84. Bundy sent a letter to Keppel saying, I can give you my expertise. Bundy calls him a riverman, which is true. In fact, most of the dialogue, again, is taken from the tapes that they recorded. It mentions, the idea of holding a slasher film convention and then sort of, questioning everyone that showed up, saying that slasher films and pornography will influence people. Also, the fact that he will go back to the dump sites to have sex with the bodies, which, all of that was said in Riverman because this is very faithful too. But really, the whole thing about going back to the dump sites to have sex with the bodies, that in real life, that was really the only useful thing that Reichert and Keppel took from what Bundy said. He wrote like a 22 page profile, but the only thing that was actually useful was he will return to the dump sites. And they call it Bundy and the Green River Killer, but there's this one meeting in the movie. That's it. Because then, I'm not going to call them Richards and Keller. I'm just going to say Reichert and Keppel because that's how I know them. Reichert has to go back because another body was found, and Keppel continues the interviews, but then starts talking to Bundy about himself. So it's called Bundy and Green River Killer, but there's only one scene where he actually talks about the riverman. We see Ridgway strangled that one, the one he picked up with his son with a nylon stocking. That pretty much was his MO. I think he said most of them he strangled by hand, but he would use a belt or pantyhose or a stocking as well. Keppel mentions to Bundy because now he's doing his solo interview. He says there's 5 other cases in Washington he wants to talk to him about when Bundy was linked to and confessed to 8. There's 8 confirmed victims of Bundy's in Washington. Bundy starts talking his cases, and he writes down a name and then starts whispering. Now, I have heard this tape. This is the George Ann Hawkins confession tape. But and it's very close to the real thing where he's like, did you hear that? I said I took her head off, and I took it 20 to 50 yards down the road. Down a rocky road, hillside. it does all that, but he says the name Joanne Dawkins. The names they come up with for the victims in this are almost laughable. Joanne Dawkins, Georgianne Hawkins, which was, I believe, his seventh victim. But then goes into detail about how, he had his crutches, his briefcase, and walking down the alleyway. She stopped to help him. He clubbed her in the head with a crowbar, put her in the passenger side, drove away. And I have heard all of that in that tape. And it is very eerie when he says, like, I struck her in the head with the crowbar. He doesn't mention hacksaw, which he did in the tapes. So I like how a lot of it is verbatim. Now, this definitely did not happen. Ridgway spotted returning to a dump site, and not only that, when they go to arrest him, he runs. Reichert's trip. This is the slowest chase I've ever seen in a movie. They're literally like, yeah, being cautious through the woods, but they're literally just like going so slow. Like, worst act running I think I've seen. Reichert trips, loses his gun. Ridgway picks it up, points it at him. The other officer starts shooting at him. I don't remember if he shoots back or not, but he runs away and he's able to get away. That never happened. But then we see him at the police department. But they say they oh, that was later on. But yeah, he definitely did not. He was not seen at the dump sites. He did not attack or pull a gun on an officer. He was very careful. We go back to Keppel and Bundy. We serial killers are your sons, your husbands. We're everywhere. And there will be more of your children dead tomorrow. That's one of the most famous Bundy lines. I don't remember if it was part of the Keppel sessions, or if it was part of this time frame. But it shows that. Then it shows Ridgway brought in for questioning, which is true. They make it seem like it's unrelated to pulling a gun on an officer, so you can tell that's fictional. He was arrested in '82 for charges relating to prostitution, or soliciting a prostitute, I should say. He became a suspect in '83, passed a polygraph in '84, but when the guy's giving Reichert the briefing on Ridgway, he says he was accused of choking a prostitute in '98. He says '98. Supposedly we're still in '82, so that was kind of weird. He was picked up again relating to prostitution in 2001. They think he might have killed as late as '98, but yeah, aren't we still in the '80s? That's what I put. Especially since they bring up the polygraph, because he says, I think we should give him a polygraph. And that was in '84. They do give him the polygraph. He does pass. Then we jump 7 years later. It says 1989. So everything that happened was in '82. It says despite Bundy's help and polygraph happening in '84. It says 46 bodies were found by '89. While he was eventually convicted of 49. Some of the bodies were not found until the '90s or the 2000s. Like, there was one in '91, one in '93, there was one in '03, one in 2010, which they say 46. So I don't know if it was quite 46 was found by '89. And this is done in voiceover. $15 million of funding, I think taxpayer funding, hundreds of thousands of hours of man hours, and now the task force being dissolved. That was all true. King County Executive Tim Hill did disband the Green River Task Force in '89. says Bundy set to be executed the next day, so he must be January 23rd of 89. It says he's being executed for the abduction and murder of 12-year-old Caroline Keach. Again, these names are laughable. The 12-year-old was Kimberly Leach, and they gave her Caroline Keach. And then it says he's suspected of 20 to 40, but has confessed to 23. He ultimately did confess to 30. Keppel visits him the day before his execution, which is true. And Bundy goes into this dialogue about how he discovered and got into and was influenced by pornography, and how the pornography became more hardcore as time went on, and like the detective magazines, and how pornography will create more serial killers. All of that verbatim, almost verbatim, and his mannerisms and how he says it is pretty much verbatim to his last interview with the evangelical psychologist James Dobson, which you can find on YouTube, which was the day before his execution. So then it says he's executed. Then we jump to 2001. It says the task force being started up again. I don't know if that's true. I think it was just more that DNA got more sophisticated, and they did keep Ridgway's DNA. It started keeping it in 87. I think they actually found a body that had a dress next to it with semen. This is according to the film, but I think in real life it was similar. They tested the DNA they kept of the suspects to DNA that they kept of the victims as testing became more sophisticated, and they got all these matches for Ridgway. We do get the fictionalized Hollywood scene where Reichert is saying, like, I know you want me safe behind a desk, but I can't let this one go. She says, you put so much of your life into this. You need to let it go. I can't let it go. It's part of me every day. I'm in too deep now. And she's like, I will be behind you no matter what. I just want you to be safe behind a desk. We get all that stupid shit. So that DNA links to Ridgway. They go and arrest him. I can't tell where it is. If it's a random place, if it's at his work, if it's near his house. In real life, he was arrested November 30th of 2001 at the truck factory where he worked. Wife sees the news, and we see that she's shocked by it. It's the same wife that he had in the beginning of the film when it was 82, which he did not have the same wife when he got arrested as back in the beginning of his spree, because his third wife, which is the one he was married to at the time of his arrest, Judith Lynch, he married in 88 up until his arrest. His second wife, Marcia Brown, whom he had his son with, he was married from 73 to 81. So he actually really wasn't married during the height of his spree. Then we get end text. Ridgway found guilty of 49 murders. Yes. Initially it was 48, but then later on the 49th, the 49th victim was attributed to him, and he was convicted of that. Which I think she was found in 03. He claimed to have killed at least 71. True, currently serving multiple life sentences. Obviously, he's serving 49. Taken several trips to show authorities where bodies were dumped. Some were never recovered. True. But then we get this additional scene where Reichert and Keppel meet up again, kind of say, like, it's all over. Congratulations. So what now? Well, now we move on. How do we stop things like this happening again? Well, there are things we can do, but the times they are changing. And then Reichert's like, you know what? You're right. And he throws his badge into the Green River. I don't think that's true. Now, this movie does have some accuracy to it. Mainly just in, okay, some of the bullet point things are accurate. Like passing the polygraph, having his son with him on at least one occasion. Uh, the things they talk to Bundy about, some of the things he says, a lot of his dialogue being from confession tapes and interviews. It has that, but at the same time, it's an ultra low budget film. I mean, the accents of the actors are shining through, which makes me think these are very inexperienced or very uh, I don't want to say amateur, but very inexperienced actors. The names that they give the victims is almost like they're not even trying. Uh, the the lighting is really weird in some scenes, like they're trying to be stylish, but it doesn't really work. It just looks awkward. I'm guessing there was no proofreading, or maybe this was written very quickly. Like, to mention, Gary Ridgway was accused of choking a prostitute in '98, but you're supposed to be in '82 at that time in the film. And, I mean, I would say the best parts, other than having some, like, verbatim lines being recreated, would be, okay, the actor that plays Bundy does do a good job at sounding and looking like him when he's doing the Bundy lines. Like I said, when he's doing the original lines, you can tell he's not that good. And the guy playing the Keppel character wasn't that bad. But other than that, it's nothing we haven't seen before. I mean, it's literally just a lesser version of this. If you want to see, the inspiration for Silence of the Lambs, if you want to see Bundy helping with Green River, just watch this or just read the book by Keppel. It's much better than this. And after watching Killer Next Door, I will say Killer Next Door was better than this. But after watching this, I really have no interest in seeing anything else this guy has done. I mean, I've heard worse things about his other films, so if those two are his better ones, I was surprised. This was better in quality and accuracy than I was expecting. But again, that's not really saying much. So, yeah, it's just a lesser version of the Riverman, so just stick with that. So there, that is now the final Ted Bundy film, or Ted Bundy related film, that I'll be reviewing. I do want to check out some other Green River films. I know they're out there. I will be checking out more that I found on YouTube. But other than that, yeah, I might go a little bit into December, because I haven't really planned any Christmas movies yet. So maybe I'll just continue this for just a little bit more. But anyway, so and I've pretty much done all the ones I have. I think there's only a couple. The ones I have left are both, one's 3 hours, one's 4 hours. And then, like, the Wayne Williams one I want to see is like 4.5 hours. So I'll have to pick and choose the ones that I find on YouTube. But at this point, I don't know what the next ones will be. So stay tuned for whichever ones I do next. And thank you for watching.